Update. Am I the a-hole for losing it and calling my father a weak, pathetic man in front of his family? Original post. My father has always been against any confrontation or arguments. He is extremely passive, refuses to stand up for himself, and avoids any conflict. If someone isn't paying attention while walking and bumps into him, he insists it's his own fault. If his employer would mess up his salary, he wouldn't bother fixing it. If a mechanic didn't properly repair his car, he would just accept it as it is. This unfortunately resulted in a tumultuous childhood with my insanely narcissistic mother. She controlled his every move. She got him to quit his job and be a locked-in stay-at-home dad. She had him do every chore. She insulted him at every step. She cheated on him relentlessly and even brought affair partners into our home. She enjoyed making his life miserable every day, and he never questioned it. My extended family, God bless them, were there for me so many times, as much as they could be. They tried for years to make my father leave, but he never budged. When she would direct her anger onto me in the form of screaming, insulting, or general demeaning, my father never once fought the guts to stand up for me or support me. When I was a kid, if I cried to Dad about something Mom did or said to me, he would sweep it under the rug or just insist I forget about it. Heck, he would even try and justify it. As I grew older, it really set in for me how messed up this was. My mother gladly kicked me out of the house when I was 18, and my father just sat there and looked sullen. Didn't say a damn thing. I joined the Air Force almost immediately and got stationed on the other side of the country. The dynamic was awful, and I could have easily gone down the incel route, if not for therapy and the amazing people I met along the way. It took years for me to get in a better mental space. I was filled with hatred. My mother left my father 2 years after I got stationed and utterly destroyed my father in a divorce. She was killed a year later in a DUI with one of her affair partners. I took a lot of joy in hearing that it took her hours to die, and that's when I really knew I needed help to process things. I'm almost 30 now, have a girlfriend who is perhaps the best thing to ever happen in my life, and fully understands the situation with my family. I have learned to not allow myself to be consumed with anger and resentment by my past, or so I thought, you'll see, and instead put that energy to my future. I've been extraordinarily low contact / near no contact with my father since I left. As much as I try, I cannot make that connection with him. I recently went to a family reunion and brought my girlfriend with me. My father was there as it was his side of the family. They have many issues with him, but he is family, so whatever, I guess. I made sure to avoid him. I was chatting with my uncles when I heard my father talk in the background. He was discussing how a coworker of his was going through a divorce as he discovered his wife was having an affair and was positioned to have a very favorable divorce on his side. My father remarked how his coworker should work instead to forgive his wife, and by his own words, set a good example for unity and forgiveness, and how he believed he set a great example for me in that extent. I swear it was like a switch went off in my head, and I was mentally back to being the rage-filled 18-year-old. All these years, and he never learned a damn thing. I turned to him and asked if he was freaking serious. He looked at me and started to stutter. I know the next minute was pure word vomit and I can't relay it perfectly, but to sum it up, I shouted how he was a pathetic father, a pathetic man. His family all know he's a disgrace of a human being who would rather his son be treated like garbage than defend him because he's a freaking coward. No one would ever see him as an example to live by. His wife would rather sleep with half the neighborhood than even touch him, and he should never, ever believe anyone respects him. I began to derail and ramble between my shouting, and my girlfriend quickly took me out and drove me home. It was insane just how quickly being away from him made me feel better. She just held me when we got back and told me it's okay. Again, best thing to ever happen to me. I was ashamed of how I lost it, and I'm now going to resume my therapy. That's a given. However, I'm glad I finally unloaded what always needed to be said onto him. Extended family's pretty mixed with reactions. His brothers / my uncle said it was time for him to hear it from me. My grandparents are mad I did that in front of the entire extended family, with some saying I should have done that behind closed doors instead of everyone. Now for the top comments before reading the update. All I can say, based on your post and this interaction, is your anger is deeply misguided, and you're failing to recognize the truly horrifying thing. You're behaving like the mother you actually should hate. Oh, trust me, I fully hate her as well. But she's gone, and there is no use in holding a grudge against a dead person. I'd hoped, though, after his son making him an outsider in his life, his family openly joking face-to-face about his failings as a father, and his ex-wife draining him for everything he had and making him start over in a one-bedroom apartment, his friends slowly leaving his life one at a time out of embarrassment, that he would maybe have at least one moment to reflect, and maybe consider he should have done things differently. It sounds like you finally got to express the pent-up feelings you've carried for so long. While the outburst wasn't ideal, it seems like it was a necessary step towards healing. It's good you're assuming therapy to process this further. Yeah, afterwards it hit me that although it was very cathartic, it definitely wasn't the most appropriate way to handle it. Lol. Don't let this concern you too much. You were greatly harmed as a child. While you are an adult, the harm people receive as a child becomes a core part of them, in personality, the way the brain is wired, and even in the physical body. Immune response. Your father's neglect to protect you from abuse came from his passivity. Neglect is abuse. Him allowing another to abuse you while present, he was an active participant. Now, him telling others they should be more like himself, modeling his passivity as a virtue, should create a visceral action in you. This is a critical moment in your healing. An adult finally stood up for the abused child. Someone finally stepped in and said this is not okay. You just happen to be both the abused child and the active adult who stepped up to advocate for the child. Any person who was an adult at a time who could have stepped up and stopped the harm that both your parents put you through don't get to say anything about the way you're handling it now. They had an opportunity to step in and step up. They failed. Live a wonderful life. Be good to yourself. Life can be filled with so much joy and wonder. I hope you can feel the fullness of healing. Now for the update days later. Thanks for the advice and recommendations, even amongst some of the YTAs. However, some of them needed to be addressed because they were either hilarious or cringeworthy. 1. Some of them were very angry and they kind of confused me at first, until I saw their comments further down or saw their profile and saw rants about double standards, or complete non-sequitur ramblings about women. So yeah, not helpful advice, and they were great dark reflections about how I could have turned out if not for the support in my life. 2. Some attempted to portray my dad as a humble, kind, caring, sensitive old man who I'm just being a big bully to. This was a very good insight into how enablers of abuse get away with so much in today's world because so many people forget how they are part of the abuse themselves. 3. Some were attempting to mentally dissect me or have a gotcha moment with me to pull apart my story. That was generally asinine, and I had to step away from those before they asked for my cranial measurements or something. So it was pretty much immediately when I was up the next morning that I realized I needed to resolve the events of last night. I first spoke to my girlfriend and gave a sincere apology for having her see me like that. She reassured me that nothing was wrong. She'd known me for years and has always known me to be level-headed and understands why I kinda snapped. She herself has a history of dealing with narcissistic family, so she absolutely understands the dynamic. She only really told me that it would be best to work on spending time around my extended family, since my father will always be there. I told her don't worry, I'm immediately going to talk to them afterwards to figure that out. So that part's fine. Looked like kind of an ass in front of her, but I'm making sure that doesn't happen again. I also informed her my intentions to resume my therapy just to keep myself steady, which she was happy to hear. I called my grandparents and sincerely apologized as well for putting such a sore dent into their family reunion. That it wasn't appropriate, and while I still feel it felt good to say that to him, it should have been in private and not in front of everyone. I also told them that going forward, as much as I love spending time with them, since the family always hangs out in one group that my father will always be in, for now until I can handle being around him, I need to distance myself occasionally, until I feel comfortable interacting. I told them that I am nor would I ever be establishing an ultimatum or demands of them, and that either way I need to step back. I guess during my apology and explanation, I was kind of just going on a tangent, because my grandfather interrupted me to calm down. He told me that after I left, people kind of separated or slowly started leaving, and they eventually were able to talk to my father one-on-one. I guess seeing me have such a freak out resulted in my grandmother having a mini freak out of her own, when she started talking to my father, resulting in her kicking him out. While I have a great relationship with both, my grandmother has always been extra protective of me, so seeing me that way must have set off a fire in her. My grandfather then said that it has become a bit of an open family secret. My father is failing. His brothers taunt him about it and generally don't have a great relationship with him. And for my grandparents, it's always just and easy. But seeing me the other day and how it still affects me so much has really sunk in for a lot of people that it was really bad. They began to try and say sorry if they didn't do enough, which I very adamantly retorted that they did more than what anyone could have expected. It was very emotional for a minute, but culminated in them telling me that they have decided to distance themselves from my father for the time being, and have given him the ultimatum that unless he has a deep introspective and regularly goes to therapy, that distance may become permanent. My extended family, I've been told, are going to try and reach out or call or whatever, but I asked them if they could relay to them that it's not necessary, and that I'm fine, and I'm sorry for them as well for ruining the day, which again, they told me I shouldn't apologize for being hurt. Since then, extended family have sent some messages, with the general consensus that it's okay, with some older members complaining about my lack of respect towards my father. And finally, I texted my father hoping to meet at a local coffee shop and have a final talk. I met him and he didn't look good. I think his parents staring into him finally got the message through. I had so many things I could have said, but I instead asked him first thing if the coworker he gave the advice to took it well. He just said that neither him nor several coworkers interact with him anymore. I asked him if he truly 100% believes that every single thing he did for me as a child was for my benefit. He didn't really say anything. I then finally asked if he has any regrets for how I was treated as a child, and if he thinks he ever did anything wrong. He looked utterly defeated and just mumbled that he could have done more. I could have poked and prodded and could have gone on another rant, but instead I told him this should be goodbye, and I hope he gets the help he needs. I think finally unloading my frustrations was what I needed to finally be able to move on and find peace. I absolutely need to keep on track for therapy and admit that a public whining moment isn't okay, but I should be fine. Even if Opie doesn't hate his father, he surely doesn't respect him, and it's hard to maintain any kind of relationship like that. The fact that not even his son respects him has to be one hell of a wake-up call. It's likely that the dad was telling himself that despite everything he went through, the mother's abuse, he's still a good person, and he still did the right thing by not divorcing her. He's convinced himself that because it's too painful to acknowledge that his choices directly led to the abuse of a child for years. People lie to themselves about stuff all the time to keep themselves going. A kind of self-delusion. While this can help you cope in the short term, it handicaps you and prevents you from accepting your own mistakes and learning from them, becoming a better person and growing emotionally. You see this from cheaters all the time. It was a mistake. It's true love. I found a soulmate. We have a special connection. We were drunk and got carried away. My spouse was happier not knowing. I didn't want to hurt them, etc. Rather than admitting their own flaws, figuring out their own shortcomings that led them to do something so callous to someone they claim to care about, and then taking steps to rectify them. When his own son came out and emphatically said otherwise, other family members and his own mother kicked him out, it had to have made it much harder for him to keep up his delusion. Hopefully this means he'll stay away a bit, and Opie can continue to have a relationship with the rest of his relatives. I don't particularly care what becomes of the father, as with all people who abuse or enable the abuse of children. I just hope he stays away and doesn't do further harm. Opie's well-being is far more important. The father did abuse Opie. Neglect counts. And watching your kid be abused and doing nothing about it counts as neglect. This father sounds emotionally dead. This goes beyond cowardice or passivity. There is something deeply wrong with his emotional stability to be this empty. He's white-knuckling through life, just allowing things to happen to him. I was thinking the same. What happened? Honestly, I hate conflicts and confrontations too, and I'm working on my wimpiness. But at least I get angry if only on the inside. I'm so curious about his thought process. Last story. Am I the a-hole for bringing up mother-in-law's finances at a family gathering after she constantly brings up mine? My mother-in-law is constantly making derogatory comments about our finances. We aren't rich, but we aren't broke either, and we have never asked her for money. She has chosen to give us some generous gifts, so really it is none of her business. Every time we are excited about something, new car, a trip, some home renovations, she has to chime in and ask if we can afford it, or if we are sure it is a good use of money. I've also heard through the grapevine that she thinks I'm spoiled. Not sure where she is getting that from. If she was just frugal herself, that might not bother me so much. But mother-in-law lives a very lavish life and doesn't say this nonsense to anyone. Her man-child boyfriend recently went out and bought a Ferrari because he was sad, and she didn't say anything about that. She is a CEO, and I know she makes bank, but still we are not poor. I'm sick of it, and I've asked my husband to talk to her. But truth be told, he is kind of a wuss. We had a family gathering recently, and my mother-in-law pursed her lips when she found out I had upgraded my wedding band and made a snide comment that it wasn't even 10 years and implied it was a waste of money. I looked right at her and began asking questions. How much do you have in your bank account? Who pays your bills? Are you splitting the money equal in your will? Because we all know you like your daughter more. What did that bag cost? Mother-in-law was horrified and said I'm tacky for talking about money. I clapped back that she has been talking about my money for years and clearly doesn't like it when the shoe is on the other foot. She rolled her eyes and stormed off. My husband was mortified and said I really went too far and embarrassed him in front of his family. Now for the comments. Lol, I think it was hilarious. Since your husband is mama's boy, somebody needs to be aggressive. Now you're mortified? She's been embarrassing me for years in front of family, and you've done nothing. Shut her down or get ready for more of this. Not a-hole. But really, I hope you're prepared to deal with this for life, because it sounds like your husband is his mother's emotional surrogate, who would still be with her if it weren't for you, and your husband hands his balls to her when she's around. Personally, I prefer to be the only woman with access to my husband's balls, but you do you. They aren't even that close. He's just terrified of her. To be fair, most people are. But she isn't one of those boy moms. Why is he terrified of his mom? Regardless, tell him that the only way for him to no longer be terrified of her is to stand up to her. She's probably waiting for him to do that anyway. It's very freeing. Everyone's terrified of her. She's ruthless and cutthroat in business and doesn't know how to turn it off when she gets home. He grew up watching everyone in the family buckle to her demands, mostly because they wanted her to pay for stuff. It's sad he doesn't get she doesn't respect any of them because they let her act this way. Exactly. Your husband and you don't sound like you need her money. So if your husband wants her respect, he has to stop cowering before her. You did it, so he can too. Besides, she's a huge hypocrite who seems to have major look-at-me syndrome.